Welcome to Backlog Weekend, the show where we take a look at my plastic model backlog on a Saturday, pick one project from it, and finish it before Monday. My name is Louis of Louis Loves Minis, and if you love painting miniatures, building scale models, or just talking about the hobby altogether, this is the channel that you should subscribe to. Now for today, I'm preparing myself to get the Indomitus box set. So that means I have to at least blow off a big chunk of my backlog. And currently, this is the biggest box set, and I'm about around 50% done with this set. I still have yet to do the Captain, the Aggressors, and the Redemptor Dreadnought. Everyone else is done. The Intercessors and the Hellblasters are done. So, if you've noticed in my previous episode, these are the two new additions to the backlog, and I'll be creating a special diorama for these guys. I just love making Star Wars dioramas for some reason. And I feel like I want to take it light today by just doing the Captain, just one miniature for this weekend compared to last weekend. It took me 2 entire weeks or 4 entire weeks to edit the last video. So hopefully this should be a lot faster. Today is Saturday, let's get it done, let's build a Captain, and it's painted before Monday. The Primaris Captain is part of the Imperial Fist Battle Force box set that came out a few Christmases ago, so that means it comes with some Imperial Fist upgrade sprues. So in addition to the 2 sprues it originally comes with, we have some upgrade sprues to play with. So what I'll do now first is I will build up the guys in sub-assemblies and show you how we are to prime this guy, because how we're priming him is very unique. When you have like a fiddly bit like this and you want to trim the excess sprue without really bending these fragile bits, take a paper clip, and I find it to be the more gentle approach to bits like that, where you can just trim down the excess flash like you're trimming down nails, and then sand the remaining bits afterwards. And the sanding shouldn't take a lot of toll now that you're only sanding a few bits off, and you won't risk snapping off the fragile bits. See? Still intact. This is our Captain in our sub-assembly, and I'll explain why he's in this specific configuration in a bit, but I do want to show you this little conversion I made. He's supposed to have a helmet, and he's supposed to have that little, I don't know what you call it, mane on top of the helmet, and I'm trying to make it look like a little 40k Bowhawk. And they've even went about and kit bashed both weapon options of the bolter here. I got both a stalker and a mastercrafted bolt rifle together. I've got my basing materials all here for my Captain, and of course he has to lead an army, and that army has to look uniformed, and this is basically the paint scheme that we're going for. Very dark, well, not dark, but high contrasted Imperial Fist. And the base I want to look like a sort of urban rubble destruction thing. So we have some cork flooring, but also some protruding ruins here. And of course, for the Captain, he's got to have like a lot of pieces that are distinguishable or scenic in addition to the model itself. I want this to sort of be a buried dome underneath, and I'll bury that with some cork. Well, roughly something to that nature. And then I'll add like a few stones and some wreckage on the side, and I'll be using later some diorama effects, which I will show you how I will bring all of those greeblies together. The GW lid may be too high to cover with just 2 layers. I might have to cover it with 3 layers of cork, and the last time I had a miniature with 3 layers of cork, he was way too up high on the base and wasn't very practical for gaming. So this is a gaming piece. What I'll do is I'll just cut a portion of it here and then just use that
as part of the base instead, just to have like a little broken protruding dome, and I'll figure out the angle. Just let the saw do the work here. It's a very thick case or rubber, as you know. Try not to put force when you're doing this. The idea is you just want to have a stable object, because the moment you put too much force, you slip, you lose your finger, and then that's, you know, a big impact on your hobby. So let the saw do the work for you. Let's just be patient. See, they're slowly hacking through it. There you go. That's beautiful. Now I'm gonna sand that down, and that's just gonna be like over there on the side, just like a sunken building of some sort. So that's how it looks now. Of course, he's not glued onto the base, but you get the idea now. And I will just be adding like some more greeblies. This is all the base glued up and dried together. And normally I would be filling in these gaps with the help of some Vallejo ground texture. But the difficulty with this specific model is that the foot already has some terrain on the base or on itself. So if you watch my previous video, you know that I like to pin my models onto my gaming pieces. So that means I'll have to pre-fit the pin or drill my holes in first, so that when I put the ground texture, it doesn't hinder the figure from going in the base. I'll show you what I mean later when I get it all done, and also I'll be magnetizing this base as per usual. So what I did was I pinned each individual leg with a paper clip and some glue, and I used the cork and pierced to mark where they would be, and they use a drill bit to sort of drill some holes. But right now I'm fitting the miniature before I cover everything else up with some texture paint. That's the position that we want him in. See, what we're doing here is trying to figure out our sub-assemblies, and I want to make sure this leg is flush on the base because I'm about to put some ground texture, and I can't put the ground texture after painting because I will paint over this. So that means I need to fix this leg in first, apply the ground texture, then prime, and that gives me the room to sub-assemble this part of the miniature. When we're done with the base coats and I want to build the whole miniature, this leg will be my guide into putting him in like that. So everything is sub-assembled. As you can see here, we've got all the bases, or rather all the bits, separated and ready for priming. Also for the base, which we're still not done because we have to add the texture, I have already taken the liberty of adding a magnet at the bottom, and now we're putting it on our little holder here. Ground texture. So I love this thing. It's also a way to adhere bits to other bits because it also dries. So I use this little spatula plastic thing. So I'll just take some, and with this case I want to just cover the bits that are obviously showing separation or showing that it's glued, or rather it's not dug in. If there's some on the edge, I wipe it immediately because this does tend to dry quick when it's applied in small amounts. They also add a second type of texture in addition to the cork, because we also don't want to make it look like it's just cork on the base. The reason why I wanted to fix the foot already was because I wanted to blend the plastic bit and the cork. I just want to put some texture in between, hiding that line of separation without obscuring the detail, and remembering that the other foot goes here so that we do not obscure that foot from coming in the future. The texture is finally dried, and you can see how that looks over here. And we've got like a nice whatever that is over there. And we'll start ahead with the Zenithal Prime. But the difference of what we're trying to do with the Zenithal Prime is we'll be using contrast paint on top of it, and I want to take advantage of that. And since this will be an Imperial Fist, I want to have like a really high contrast shadow at the bottom, if you can see that brown over there. And I do that by making a white to gray to brown Zenithal Prime, and that's sort of going to be our shadow. So our Zenithal Prime is done, and you can see the white, and check out the shadow, and you can just imagine how that will look with the yellow. Now you would normally think, for you artists out there, purple would be a great contrast, but I feel or purple would be a great contrast shadow, and I tried that, but it seems to have well, I just don't like the effect on how it looks on contrast paint, as it doesn't brown. You just really see literally purple underneath the yellow, and it's too much of a contrast, so I just went with brown as our shadow, except I didn't shadow the head because I wanted that to be the focal point of our miniature. So we're using Flow Improver with our contrast paints, and that's because it'll help avoid the pooling in the flat surfaces, and at the same time it should also thin it down to make sure that the shadows retain, especially for the thicker contrast paint. So we'll be applying the white on our shoulder pads here and maybe some here, and I kind of like the idea of having a white inner cloak and keeping the outside red for the rank. I'm using a fairly large brush for this. That's because it's the first layer, so we're not really trying to be careful with anything. It's not really my best brush, but it gets the job done really quickly. And we'll apply the neater layers later on. And you'll also notice that, oh, let's get the back of this too. And for you guys who are used to contrast colors, you know that the gray or the white is not actually a white here, which I like because it allows us to highlight up into an edge highlight of white down the line. The tassels will be white and red to mimic the rank that he has as well. So this is a very thick coat of the white because the white is very thin pigmented. And if you guys have seen my previous videos, I put any remaining excess paint inside this mystery jar, and that will just be some rando crap wash that I can recycle and use for a terrain project or something that needs heavy weathering. And then next we have Gilliman Flesh, and that will just be for the bear head over here, and we'll do the eyes later in acrylic paint. Again, terrible shitty brush, just so we can get a base coat. So we will be layering over this with our highlights, and I just want to block in deepest shadows and recesses. So for Yandan Yellow, unfortunately I had a mishap in my recent project, and look at how little that is. So here's to hoping that I have enough. I think I have enough for just one miniature, sure, why not. But we're just gonna slap it on, avoid the pooling. So this is a heavy coat. So what you wanna do, or what we wanna do, is when we finish one part, we wipe away the excess we don't like, where it pools. Okay, so far so good. The Flow Improver really does a number. There you go. Looks beautiful, doesn't it? It's like you just cheated the shading in one go. Remember, we painted this in white, some parts in white, so we're just gonna avoid the shoulder pad and that center cloak for a bit. The good thing about contrast paints is it takes a while to dry, so if we do make a mistake, we can always just pick it up with a empty or thirsty brush. And as we get closer to the cloak, we will just avoid the parts that we painted white,
and then you can go back to slopping it on. We'll avoid that part with the white for just a bit because that needs more finesse. So we want to keep our contrast thin because I don't want it to pool, and also I want that zenithal that we did to show. So we have very little paint on our brush, and that means you can be a bit more careful in applying, even with a large brush. See, I didn't even change brush, but because the paint is little or it's not that loaded, you can be a bit more careful. You retain those shadows. Now we're gonna use skeleton horde for all our skeleton bone stuff, and even some of the fabric like the purity seals and stuff. We'll be painting the purity seals first and then moving on to the skeleton stuff, bony stuff rather. The reason why I'm painting the purity seals first is because the next color will be volupus pink, which is used for the wax. So I want to give enough ample drying time for the seals so we can head on straight to the wax, if that makes any sense. So the gun casing has a couple of, there you go. Take note, crud, there's white underneath. So beauty of contrast paints. I know it's not visible, but I remember painting this side over here white because that's the flap that went up front. And now it's volupus pink. And just for the small little purity seal over here, I'm still going to be using a larger brush, because even though it's a small detail, because we won't be at risk of hitting any other important areas because we'll be covering that up anyway. Our next color would be Blood Angel's Red to do the tassels and the shoulder pads and maybe some parts of the weapons. This time I will be switching over to a finer brush because most of the mini is already covered in paint we don't want to touch. We are going to do the shoulder pad first, which is the largest area, I think. It should be, let's start with the easiest and then we could work our way with the finer details as we get a warm up with a smaller brush. So keep your brush lightly loaded. In this case, a heavier loaded brush is harder to control, and especially if this is contrast paints, the process slows down, contrary to popular belief of contrast paints being a faster process. Be careful not to touch the wet contrast parts that you just painted, which is your fabric. There's still going to be black gun casings. I just want to make it look like it's customized for this captain. So the upper casing will be red. And we've already painted a portion of that, so be careful. Just like a coloring book, just outline the parts you don't want to touch. Use your pinky for support, and just painting the upper casing. We're gonna do the mohawk of this guy. So again, do not load heavy, and I will just maybe make a line to guide to where and to where. So that's one square. Looks good. And then let's do one square here. And I'm not so sure if I'm great. So thank God there are already lines in the miniature, so it could guide the direction. And I'm super nervous. Contrast paint ironically makes me nervous when I'm at this stage. Keep it going back with a bigger brush, and take in mind that this is meant to be white. We just grade it out with the apothecary white. Just be mindful that the inside is also white. We're trying to just be careful, and the way I supported this piece is just to sticky tack and blue tack. It may not be the wisest choice because it's an unstable support. So we can easily willy-nilly just go about painting this cape like this, but once you get to the edges, make sure you don't over flick the red, because I want the rims to also be white. So when I flick to the edge, I make sure I stop in a controlled manner because I want to keep that white edge. The part that really makes me nervous are these lines over there and that Aquila over there, and I want that to be red using the edge of our brush
Okay, that sucks. Oh, that sucks a lot. Not the best line. I'm doing a terrible job at this. I will be fixing that with some acrylic white when we go over to the highlighting stage. So when you do make a mistake, have that mindset that it is fixable. Do not get frustrated. Do not panic. It's always fixable. Of course, it's, you know, it's frustrating to having to go back a step every now and then, but that's just such is the nature of our hobby. Then we have Flesh Terrace Red as our last red color, and normally an Imperial Fist would have the Aquila at the center to be Flesh Terrace Red, but I want that to sort of be gold or maybe silver. So I'll be putting the Flesh Terrace Red here on the shoulder pad instead, because I think it would be too red in this area. Plus I want to make him look a bit special by not giving him the same color of Aquila as his underlings. I just have to be a bit more careful as well here because there's white again in this area. Now my favorite contrast color, which is I'm sure most people's favorite contrast color, is Wildwood Brown for the leather bits. Let's start with his bolter here, which is really, I want to customize it some more. It's not just like an usual black cased bolter, but more of like a, it's got like leather stuff going on, customized specifications for comfort, or well, actually they don't need comfort, but, and then we'll do his little strap over here, which is also fun to paint because it's just like a swipey swipe. Painting up the little pouches he's got going on. And down the line, because there are gradients and you see where it pools or it doesn't pool, that's going to guide us in where we will do our edge highlighting, because we'll get to see the parts that are raised. Painting brown, I like it because it's a neutral color that breaks apart whatever paint scheme you have, and it just adds like an automatic accent. And for our final contrast color is Black Templar. We will be using that for the base because I want that to be a big contrast from the yellow and brightness of the model, and as well as like the little itty bitty black parts on the miniature. So I find the Black Templar to actually be, to not have a lot of coverage, and that's fine because we do want some of the texture below to show. So all the contrast colors are done, and some of you may note that some of our contrast colors are very thin because I want that texture underneath to show up, and at the same time I don't want that pooling to happen. Even though to some degree up close you see speckles of the undershade, I like that it connotes either a reflection of some sort or a sort of ruggedness to the miniature, and it depends on the viewer on how they want to take that, and I think it makes it a bit more of an interesting model to look at as opposed to just flat base coats. Plus it looks like we worked hard on it, glazing something over. I'm gonna take our metallic paints because I don't like the contrast metallic paints. The reason why I love this metallic is that there's no need to sort of water it down, unlike other Vallejo metallics. This is my own mix of my gold since I don't have the GW gold. I hate these metallics. I mean, there's lots of options for Vallejo, but I always need to add some thinner just so I could get that nice thin consistency as with the metallic airbrush color. So we only have a few golden bits here, which is basically the hilt of the power sword and this little emblem here, and I want to avoid hitting the center skull because I really want to maintain that bone color that we've initially applied. It's the only acrylic base color we'll use because I don't have a green contrast paint right now, and I will be using that to just base coat these green leaves details right here. Afterwards we can wash up our metallics, then proceed to building and highlighting our miniature. Now we have everyone's favorite non-oil, but since we already have a dark metal
we'll just be doing the very recesses, and we'll be applying this on just the metallic bits. As you already know, contrast already pre-shades everything. So I just want to add an extra level of depth to this character or miniature. We'll also be adding some flow improver to my shade, because I do not want it to pool, and it would help me with the recess shading. Before we do the recess shading, we have some metallic bits here that I want to sort of make it look a bit more dirtier. So we'll just do an entire shade for that one. Right there. Make it look like it's really part of the wreckage or part of the ground, and just blend that in. In that case, the metallic shades on the miniature would look a bit more neater than the ones here. Really, it's just a matter of filling in those gaps here. I have a small bit of Agrax Earth shade for the little green effect here, and as you can see, we've already shaded. Well, I hope you can see we've already shaded our metallic bits. Then for the gold bits, Reichland Flesh Shade. It's just a short step because we have very minimal gold on the miniature. As you can see, I've also added some gold on the head gear over here. I did miss some parts of yellow in small areas that bother me by a little bit, and they're just in the crevices, so I'll be shading them with the Reichland as well. For the Reichland, it's not much of a pin wash but more of a tinting. I really like how Reichland has an effect on the gold colors. Well, for the lantern and for the scopes and other screens on the miniature, I'll be base coating it with white, and then we'll be applying a Thalasar contrast blue and then dotting it again with white, and that should be our quick way to cheat some reflective elements. And I'll also take the step to add the white on maybe the teeth and the eye socket over there. Now normally if we're using acrylic paints, I'd base coat this with a black and then glaze up the colors, and brighter we go, but this is contrast paint, so when it's contrast, it's the other way around. It's light to dark. So that's what we're doing now. The base coat doesn't have to be super neat. It just has to be well defined in terms of its shape. So get that outline right. But the tricky part is the eyeball here. So what I like to do is I like to make the side of the face or side of the eyeball closer to me so I don't touch the nose by accident. Just touch the tip. Just the tip. Right there. I'm also going to thin down our contrast paint because Thalasar blue is a very dark yellow, and I want it to be a bit lighter because we're going to lose that shine if we just apply it straight from the bottle. And then here, the cool part is we can do a little overlap, and what I'm trying to do is not touch the center of the miniature. That looks pretty cool, huh? And while we're at it, I wanted to sort of start with the power sword and use this contrast paint as our basis for making an outline for where the lightning will go. If you notice, the lines are very thick, and that's okay. We'll fix that up as we go down into our other blues, but for now we just want to set some guides. Then we're gonna go move on to our acrylics slowly. I'll use this black to sort of dot his eyeball. So this is where we hold our breath and hope that we don't die. I'm sorry I can't show you. I'm trying to not mess up the eye this time. I think I still messed it up. Oh no, I didn't. He sort of has like... And for the power sword, we're gonna sort of build up layers starting with ultramarine, Lothern blue, that's Lothern blue by the way, it's just the bottle, glacier blue, and then some white. And that's why we added a very thick color on the power sword, because that will be the outline of the glow, and we'll build up whiter and whiter as we get to the center of that power sword. So update, the camera died, but good news is I moved on, pushed forward and built up the miniature. And you can see I already did the power sword. It's just a matter of layering the colors I illustrated up to the white. And when I got to the white, I just dotted it. For those of you that have shaky hands, use that to your advantage. So at this point, I'm pretty pleased with him. He looks pretty cool, especially in this light. And we begin with our edge highlighting. And all of my edge highlighting, I also like to add Flow Improver. As you guys already noticed, this is sort of my favorite product right now. So when I'll be edge highlighting the white, I'm talking about the cape, I'm talking about the bits of his flesh, I'm talking about the top of his mane over there, and then his shoulder pads that are white also. It's really thick edge highlights because this is the first layer of highlights we have. And I want more white to come out of the gray, to be honest. So I want to do some flesh highlights, and this is very little light, just highlighting the raised parts, drawing some lines on his knee over here to just add more texture. Next we have Phalanx Yellow, and this will be the first highlight on the armor. We just want to outline all the details to make it stand out a bit more, and also to balance out the shadow. We have a lot of shadows going on thanks to our undertone, undershade, and this will be a thick highlight because we want to sort of make a gradient when we add our second highlight. In this phase we can be a bit less neat because we will be neating that up with the second highlight, and this will also sort of be a guide for that. And as this highlight color is close to our base tone, it is also a bit more forgiving in that sense, except for when you get to the shadowed areas, which is the orange bits. Basically, I'll be going over all of the panel armors here. I've highlighted the armor. I think there's a noticeable difference on the camera. We'll even up the ante with a second layer later. But for now, let's layer these fabrics and purity seals. And for that, we'll be using buff, which is also the same color that we will use to be highlighting the second layer of edge highlights for the armor. So I think I'll do that together. And when we're highlighting parts of the armor, we're only highlighting the upper edges. And if you've noticed, the first highlights that we've been doing with the armor is also serving as an outline for the details. But not only are we defining what's highlighted or what are higher points, we're also defining the smaller details. And for the second layer, it's all about just the raised areas. No need to define anything because I feel like everything else is pretty well defined. And we're trying to stay within the initial lines we previously drew. We're only highlighting the upper portions. One, to save time, and two, to really define that the light is coming from up top and not anywhere else. The moment they start tilting the miniature downwards, that's the moment they stop highlighting with this color. They start highlighting the purity seal, which would be a nice contrast because it's a heavily shaded object. There's more contrast since we started with a heavy shadow thanks to the undercoat. The highlight looks so much darker and brighter that it's so satisfying to see from afar. And that's the beauty of, I believe, miniature edge highlighting, is because we can make the smaller details visible from a tabletop perspective. And if I were to argue even more, I would sometimes say that tabletop standard is a standard that has highlights as opposed to just base coats and washes, because
when something is highlighted, you can see it, see all the details and appreciate all the details from the perspective of standing on a tabletop view. I'll also be painting some of the leaves that we left here. Now, the thick highlights you did, which are also messy, will serve as one guide for our fine edge highlight. And our fine edge highlight will also serve as our way of cleaning up those thick crooked lines by neatening up the edges by filling it in. So for me, it's easier this way, or for me, the smaller highlight is actually easier because I laid down the groundwork with the thicker one. Next up, we have Warlord Purple. That is just gonna be for the wee little purity seal. So we just want to get the raised areas and dot that in. And maybe just a little bit in the center. So something just really faint. Next we have Pink Horror, and the Pink Horror will be for the red details that don't have anything to do with rank as much, like maybe the gun casing, this rope, and this hilt. And the pink makes it show like it's a softer red, not like hard steel, but more of like velvety type of red. I'm also gonna do the Pink Horror on this guy's decorative mohawk. So we are now going to use gory red on the shoulder pad symbol, as well as add more texture here by highlighting more gory red, because I sort of like the idea of having a lot of layers of color here, and maybe here too I'll add gory red here. Next we're doing bloody red to suffice for the shoulder pad. And if you're familiar with the way I paint, I like to differentiate materials and base colors by highlighting them differently. So you could really tell we highlighted this differently and highlighted this differently and highlighted this differently. And I'll also, I guess, add some bloody red here. I want to add more definition to the highlights there. So this red is also quite translucent, which makes it easy to blend. Hot orange for the cape, the shoulder pad rim, and that Aquila on the shoulder pad. This one's a bit more orangey, so we can be a bit more selective. So for the black, we have a brand new pot. Beautiful. Ashen gray, and we'll take a break for the edge highlighting and do some dry brushing on the base right here. Got my really busted up brush here, and we're just dry brushing, so it's a very minute gray. So I guess because this is contrast, the gray won't show as much than it normally would over black. The more prominent black being this shoulder pad here. But even so, Ashen gray is close to Black Templar is what I'm learning. And if you can see here, I've made like a little pink mistake. And I'll use the highlight to cover that up. Just to add a second highlight to the black, let's add some dark sea gray. And I'll just put that on the emblem of the shoulder pad as well as the black rims here. So this gray is a pretty translucent gray too, which is great because I don't want so much of a hard edge on these small areas. Translucent paint makes it easy to blend as they don't leave much watermarks. There we go. Now we can see a sort of highlight going on this area. For brown, it's some tan yellow. Oh, it's just a tan yellow is a very drastically bright color in relation to wildwood brown, so we gotta be extra thin with this one. And then what I like to do is like to scratch up the leather. Final highlight is highlighting all the metallic bits, even the gold with some silver. And I've added some thinner medium because the metallics of Vallejo are really terrible, except when they are the metallic air, which is when they are the best. So I mix all those additives to make sure they are smooth and that they wick off the brush easily. I just want to show that some parts here are metallic. I'm going to show that spike right there. Make sure people register that as metal. When I highlight the gold, it's like I'm just dry brushing slightly because it is gold. I want it to still dominantly be gold and not overly highlighted with silver. I don't want to interfere with the lightning effect, so make sure we skip areas where the lightning is. When it comes to the gold stuff, only the tips, because we don't want it to seem like it's too silver. It still needs to register as gold. So there he is. I've added some rust, if you could call that rust, down below. Just texture the base, and I'm pretty pleased with how he turned out. And though we did not get to highlight the cape as much, we did get that nice lustrous red. So now we have our captain who will lead this entire army. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please do subscribe. We'll have another backlog weekend in a week's time. Do leave some feedback and how you enjoy this type of video. And as always, this has been Louie of Louie Loves Minis, reminding you to hobby every day to keep the sprues away.